can't continue if you're not going to let me speak. I'm sorry.
If you want, you can leave.
Well, as you can all tell from that sneak peek, this episode of 7 Minute Expert is very heated and quite interesting. I think you'll all enjoy it. Please join me for a conversation with Peter Beinart and Shai Davidai, and please make sure to like and subscribe. I'm Gideon Askowitz, and this is 7 Minute Expert. My name is Gideon Askowitz. I am a student at the Macaulay program at Hunter College, and I began to engage with anti-Semitism activism about a year ago after a protest on my campus. I've spent the subsequent year creating a group called Jewish Students for America and speaking on Fox. I basically helped lobby Congress to advance American interests in American foreign policy, as well as primarily take care of local anti-Semitism and deal with issues on the universities like foreign influence in the educational system. Peter Beinart, as many of you I'm sure are aware, is the editor-at-large at Jewish Currents. He teaches also at CUNY, the journalism school. His most recent book is called Being Jewish After the Destruction of Gaza, A Reckoning. It's available for order now on Amazon. Shai Davidai worked as a professor at Columbia University until he was barred from the campus. He is a vocal supporter of Jewish students and a strong pro-Israel voice. He is also the host of the podcast Here I Am with Shai Davidai. So I want to just jump into it and ask you guys both to respond to, I think, a more provocative question, but I think it'll be provocative for both of you, and we'll try to drive at the issues here.
Before we start, can I just say, I correct was one thing. I'm not pro-Israel. I am Israeli. Expecting me to be anything other than pro myself, I see as weird, and I've never seen an argument for someone. You don't walk around saying I'm pro-American, I'm pro-Canadian. I am Israeli. I believe that I have a right to exist. That's not, that doesn't make me, because you say pro-Israel, that means I'm against Palestinians. I'm not. I'm pro-Israel and pro-Palestine. I'm against terrorism. So yeah, just to make that clear.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for the correction. And Peter, if you want to correct anything I said, please feel free to do so.
Sure.
So I think we'll start with I guess Shai, because he jumped in first. Some people have actually tried to shut down this conversation in advance. I don't know if either of you received any sort of messaging, but I received certainly a lot from my local community, from the Orthodox Jewish community, saying, how could you really talk to Peter? How can you talk to Shai? Some people were also hating on Shai. So the first question is going to be to Shai. Why do people sometimes try to label you as an extremist? I know that people try to disbar you from the campus. Do you think there's any merit to that argument? And could you push back as to why you don't see yourself as an extremist or as somebody who's outside the conversation? And why did you agree to come and speak with Peter, somebody who you probably disagree with on a number of issues?
Yeah. So first of all, I can't speak for other people. I never speak for other people. I'm not, as a Jew, I'm not I just, I speak for myself. I don't know why other people, label me or anyone in a certain way. I can tell you that once the media labels someone in a certain way, it creates a reality. Some things like the New York Times, for example, when they write that X is a controversial person, then people start seeing the controversies. In the same way, but that's why I oppose being called pro-Israel or pro-Palestine or whatever those meaningless labels mean, because once you put those labels, people start seeing them into that. And look, I have to say, I'll be completely honest, I debated whether I want to have a conversation to begin with. It's not that I have no problem having conversations with anyone, but I do think that we have to acknowledge that this, split screen is creating a false equivalency. It creates this false perception as if 50% of Jews agree with X, meaning me, and 50% of Jews agree with Peter, right? That's false. That's completely false, right? And I think that's why a lot of people have a problem with someone like me speaking with someone like Peter, because if it was honest, we would have 8 other people like me, or, some of them more me, some of them more right-wing of me, some of them more Orthodox, conservative, but 8 other people, there would be 9 of us saying one thing and Peter saying another thing, right? And we would get 90% of the time and Peter would get 10% of the time, because that is the reflection of reality. The problem is with conversations like this is that it gives a sort of false legitimacy to nothing against Peter per se, but to a view of someone like Peter as if this is a 50% of the Jews. No, this is a fringe view. And I think that's why a lot of people.
Shai, can I just ask you to move a little bit closer to the mic? Some people on YouTube are having a harder time hearing you.
Yes, sorry. I hope better. Let me move because there's a lot of mess in my room. So for me, I wanted to have a conversation rather than a debate because I really have some questions that I want to understand. I want to understand the views of someone like Peter, and but I also want to acknowledge that there are in no shape or form representative of any more than a small fringe of Jewish community, and that's fine. But let's not make this false equivalence. I think that's why a lot of people oppose this conversation to begin with.
Okay. Peter, so the question for you is going to be very, very similar. Very recently, a person who I have spoken on a panel with, and I know that you have many times, Brett Stevens, wrote an article in Sapir talking about viewpoint diversity, but up to a point, where he seemingly alluded to his decision to no longer agree to appear on a panel with you. And I think the majority of the, I thought honestly was rather vehement. Some of the opinions that people have of you. Why do people characterize you and your viewpoint perhaps as something that's outside of the norm and something that shouldn't be platformed? Why did you come, and why is that true or is it not true? And how come you agreed to come and speak on a panel with people with whom you disagree? What's the value of free speech and diversity in your opinion?
Thanks. I mean, to me, it's important to talk to people I disagree with because I can learn something. I'm fallible. There's lots I don't know. There are things I've been wrong about in the past and changed my mind. And one of the best ways of learning new things is by talking to people who disagree. You know, Gideon may be familiar with the line in Pirkei Avot in the Mishnah, which says, "Who is wise? The one who learns from all people," right? And so to learn from all people means you're particularly likely to learn from people from whom you disagree. You also can gain empathy for positions, even if you're not convinced by them. You can gain empathy for those positions, see the people who are making those positions as more human if you understand more about why they hold those positions. And you also may get a better understanding of how to make your own arguments in ways that people can hear. And so for all of those reasons, I believe in talking to people I disagree, especially among Jews. We are a small group of people with a very, very painful past. And I believe that we have obligations to one another. You know, Kol Yisrael Aravim Zeh B'Zeh. We have obligations to one another, even if we profoundly disagree. Jews have been profoundly divided by many things for millennia. And yet I think part of what's important in our tradition, whether you look at the way that the Talmud talks about the students of Hillel and Shammai, was their willingness to still eat with one another, even though they had profound halachic differences. So that's the reason that I would do this with Shai and would do it with other people, as long as I felt like it would be a conversation, you know, where we would where it would be civil. I guess maybe to say something about the point that Shai made about the marginality of my views. I guess the first thing I would say is that I think, you know, the truth of a proposition is not determined by how many people, what percentage of people support it, right? First of all, I think is a general rule, right? But secondly, I think if Shai were to talk about the Israeli Jewish population and to describe my view as extremely marginal, right, less than 10% support, I think he'd be absolutely right. But I don't actually think that's true in the American Jewish population now, based on the polling that we have. Right. So there was a poll last May which showed that 30% of American Jews think Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. No, Shai. But we shouldn't interrupt each other, surely. I mean, you spoke for a while.
No, but
if we're going to do that,
Shai, I'm gonna ask. We'll do. Shai. We'll do.
You can tear me apart, but
Yeah.
just let me finish my point. Okay, so
Shai, I will mute participants. Shai, I will mute participants.
I'm about being respectful. You got to let me speak. You got to let me speak.
There's a difference between letting
Shai, I love you. Shai, I love you. Really, I do.
I can't continue if you're not going to let me speak. I'm sorry.
If you want, you can leave. If I'm not,
no, Shai. I don't want to do this.
Shai,
please, yeah.
Speak.
Shai,
you want to let me speak or not?
Shai, I will mute you.
Listen,
I will mute you.
I leave. I will not be part of a live campaign.
You're not. You're gonna have ample opportunity to respond. It can't be.
You're all of a sudden talking about Gaza. I was not reflecting your view.
I know.
I'm responding to your point. You said that my view is marginal, and I'm explaining You
Your view as
you
All right.
don't. Okay, I'm
I'm
sorry.
going to mute. Wait, Peter. I'm going to
your
mute
view.
both participants.
Okay.
Okay. I think this is the best way to do it. I understand. Okay, and Shai has left. Okay. Shai, I is a person I respect. I'm upset that that just happened. Well, I will make the effort. I will allow him to rejoin if he so chooses. In the meantime, though, now that he has ceded the ground, Peter, I think we could just proceed as an interview and discussion between the two of us, if that's okay with you. Wait, I just have to turn on your audio. I told you that I would make a very good faith effort here as a moderator. And I'm trying to uphold that. I'm somebody who really strongly believes in freedom of speech. I'm somebody who's probably more sympathetic to Shai's positions, but I don't think that was the right way to go about it. So, Peter, it is now up to you how you want to proceed, but I apologize for that.
Well, in general, I feel a little uncomfortable proceeding because I think it's unfair for me to have the mic without Shai. On the other hand, given that you do hold views that are more similar to Shai's, and I imagine can ask questions that would reflect his some of his perspectives,
Yeah.
I'm okay doing it. I think because I know that you're going to ask me tough questions, and so I'm okay doing it. I'm really I mean, it's really too bad because the only point I was trying to make was that I do think that there, if you look at the poll that came out last year, which said that 30% of American Jews think Israel is committing genocide, and that was before the Amnesty genocide report. That was almost a year ago now. Or the 2021 poll, which showed that 25% of American Jews think Israel is practicing apartheid. And in both those polls, the number of young American Jews was significantly higher. So under 44, it was 38% who said Israel is committing genocide, and under 40, 38% said Israel was practicing apartheid. I'm not claiming that those are views that are really anathema to the American Jewish establishment, and I think would be considered actually delegitimizations of the state of Israel. And yet a significant percentage of American Jews, not a majority, I'm not saying a majority, but a significant minority of American Jews. Oh, Shai is back. So let me just finish. Well, now, Shai, you didn't hear me, though.
No,
So I
he
got
did. He was following the live stream.
Anyway, so my point was simply that a significant percentage of American Jews and even larger percentage of younger American Jews, right? We're talking about 38%, actually hold views that would be considered to be delegitimizing of the state of Israel. And so I don't think among American Jews, especially younger American Jews,
Yep.
that the views are quite as marginal as you're suggesting. That was all I was saying.
Okay.
So
Okay.
let
Now,
me
Shai.
respond now because here's the problem is I have a problem with lies, and I have a problem, and that is something that I will not be part of, right? And it's amazing to me that Peter cannot go 30 seconds about talking about being Jewish without talking about something else. I did not say anything about Gaza, about the war. All I said that your anti-Zionist views are marginal, and they were marginal before the war and before this poll. And even if you say 30%, that means that 70% of American Jews, which are half of of the Jewish world, right?
Yeah,
Half
basically,
the
yep.
Jewish world, 70% see your view as marginal, right? I would say 99% of Jews in Israel. And of course, you being American centric, you're now thinking of Jews in Latin America, Jews in Europe, Jews in continental or British Europe, Jews in Australia. So don't switch and bait. That's all I'm saying. I said that your views as an anti-Zionist are marginal. You brought in Palestine, Gaza, whatever. We can talk about that. But are you not Jewish first? Like, why is your entire identity? Every argument has to be about what's happening somewhere else. Where is your Pirkei Avot? Like, just having the backwards of like your, older religious text is not enough. You can't start 30 seconds into a conversation and then deflect to what's happening in Gaza.
Okay. Can I take that apart? I think maybe just to parse that out into maybe a more distilled question for a response. So Shai, thank you so much for coming back. I don't know if you heard I was telling Peter that
I was
I
on
probably
mute.
okay, yeah. So I do more sympathize with your positions. But let's just so I think what maybe what you could respond to is maybe there are degrees of anti-Zionism. So while there might be polling that will suggest that there are many people who are more sympathetic, and increasingly numbers, I think those the polling data is probably accurate. Increasingly number of Jews who are more sympathetic to the pro-Palestine and would also simultaneously characterize themselves as not Zionist. Are those views necessarily the same as your position? You just recently wrote a column about the dissolution of Israel as a Jewish state and seeing a one democratic state as the most viable solution. So maybe there are degrees that might be marginal. If something I said is you see as incorrect, please correct that and respond to anything else I said, please.
Sure, thanks. And I think it's I don't think we need to accuse each other of being liars, this kind of thing. I think we have a different perspective, right? Shai was saying that Shai, come on, we can't keep doing this. Shai, you can't keep interrupting me.
But you can't. But
you can't. I'm sorry.
There's plenty of time for response.
We have
on a live stream, it just becomes the audio. You can't.
It's not gonna work. He's gonna mute you again if you're gonna keep doing this.
Shai, please
listen. If we're gonna have a conversation, it has to be grounded in facts.
Okay. But right now, Shai, right now, you can press back and say that he's a liar. Like, I'm not going to disrupt ad hominem attacks, but just at simultaneous conversation, it's not productive even to your own viewpoint.
I understand.
So if you understand, I'm a pragmatist.
Well, Gideon, you have to understand something.
No. So Shai, I'm sorry. I'm not going to participate in a conversation.
Shai, please.
I'm just not.
No, okay.
Please, it's not productive. Wait.
I'll tell you what.
No, Shai, you don't get to tell me why. You can't interrupt.
I'm not talking with you. I'm talking with Gideon for a second.
Okay, no, but it's a panel. It's a full panel. Okay, there will be complete time for. We could have done. You both know that we could have done individual interviews, and I would be happy to do that even after this. But on a panel, it's simply impossible for the viewers to hear your opinions when you're speaking at the same time.
But
even when you contest a matter of fact.
And something. And I'll say this because I don't want to go through this again. And Peter, let me speak.
No, Shai, I'm sorry. You can't act this way. I'm not going to participate in a conversation in which you interrupt me and then start making your point. So it's
Shai,
not going to work.
Shai, right now you're asking for.
I will not be a part of a panel where there lies. It has.
All right. Well, then I think unfortunately we're going to have to stop.
Because
Shai,
keep interrupting me.
This isn't. No, Shai,
can you just speak?
Okay, hold on, Shai. One point: if you're going to contend that he's a liar, can you not contend that at a separate second of speech?
Okay.
Conversation exists in a temporal form.
Okay.
And when you speak at the same time, it is not a conversation at all. So you're not even participating in a conversation. You've destroyed the conversation, and is therefore not possible for anybody to hear. So I'm going to hand back Peter the mic. Shai, I promise, Beinart, I promise that I will allow you to respond. You know that? You know I sympathize with you. Okay?
It's about
I understand, but in constructing this, I promise to be as impartial as possible. And I'm trying to do that. I'm going to ask Peter a lot of very hard questions, the same way I will ask you a lot of hard questions. They will probably be tougher for Peter. But
it's not about
Okay. Peter, I'm sorry, please respond. And then Shai, you will have the mic. We're going to talk about Israel, and then we will talk about anti-Semitism in the United States. That's the structure here.
Great. Yeah, and Shai can call me a liar. That's fine. I'm not going to lead the debate. I just don't want him to interrupt me. That's the only thing. So as I said, it's true that the views that I hold would be extremely marginal among Israeli Jews, and I think Shai's right, actually, that among non-American Jews also more marginal than they are in the United States. But we have a significant number of increasing polling now in America, which shows that a significant percentage of American Jews hold views that actually are at least skeptical of the idea of Zionism. So I'll cite another one from the Canadian political scientist Mira Sukharov. When she asked American Jews if they considered themselves Zionist, if Zionism means the belief in privileging Jewish rights over non-Jewish rights in Israel. And I would contend that Jews do have superior... Oh, come on.
I'll allow that. I'll allow it. It's not a verbal interruption.
You're not making yourself look good. I mean, I'm sorry, man. Like, I don't know you, but you're not. I don't think a lot of people are looking at this and thinking, wow, this is a guy who's acting with great character here. But all right, fine. I mean, do you?
What I look like. I don't care what I look like. I only care about the truth. And
okay, but you don't have a monopoly on truth, Shai. Truth,
no,
right? I know, but that's
wait. Okay, so let's make this productive. I'm gonna make this productive. Yeah, I'm gonna make this productive.
Mira Sukharov said, let me just finish that and then I'll stop. Mira
Excellent.
Sukharov found that when American Jews were asked if they consider themselves Zionism, if Zionism means the belief in privileging Jewish rights over non-Jewish rights in Israel, 69, and again, most of the Palestinians in Israel are not under Israeli control, are not citizens and can't become citizens. Those in the West Bank and Gaza, 69% said no. So my point is only, and I'm only talking about this because Shai brought it up at the very beginning. My point is that among American Jews, especially young American Jews, the views that I hold are not as marginal as he suggests when he suggests that there's 90% support for his view and only 10% of Americans are skeptical of the idea of a Jewish state. It's actually, I think, significantly higher than that.
May I respond?
Yes, you may.
So
And if Peter interrupts, I will mute him.
Okay.
I will not.
So Peter did a few things, and this is what he always does. First of all, bait and switch. You define Zionism as something, but it isn't, and then you show that people agree or disagree. If you ask people Zionism, do you agree that Zionism is picking your nose in public? Then 80% will say I oppose Zionism. So you can't just define Zionism the way you want it, so that people will then disagree. Second, he did another bait and switch where he comes and says, look, it's not that marginal. If you only look at the young Jewish Americans, 18 to 25, I didn't say that it's marginal among the young Jewish Americans. I said, if you took the Jewish whole, because Peter so loves the Klal Israel, then yes, you will need to have 9 non-Peters, some of them like me, some of them not like me, and then 1 Peter. But that is how, Peter, you always do that. You change the definition, right? You change the numbers, and then you change the denominator, and in that way you're able to say, oh, look at me, I'm actually not that fringe. Instead of being proud of being fringe, you're as fringe as the anti-Zionists in the Yevsektia in Soviet Russia, as fringe as the anti-Zionist leagues in Iraq and Egypt. You're as fringe as the Hellenistic Jews that brought idols into the temple and tried to reverse their circumcision. It's okay to be fringe. Why do you need to pretend that you speak for Jews when you don't? I don't write books saying on being Jewish X because I am not speaking for the Jews. I don't go around. And if you go on Peter's social media, you'll see how he talks about American Jews, and mostly young American Jews, showing that he even doesn't care or doesn't see himself as part of the whole Jewish experience. Because all I was talking about before you lied, that all I was talking about, that 9 out of 10 of Jews in the world are Zionists. It has nothing to do about Hamas, has nothing to do about the war. Stop bait and switching. Answer the questions, have that conversation, because it's not productive having 2 conversations where someone just comes up with definitions then in order to fill his whatever quotas of anti-Zionist rhetoric, and the other person just coming and say, no, you're absolutely wrong.
Great. Okay. So can you do respond in 60 seconds, and then I'm going to switch to concrete definitions, and we'll move the conversation to Israel exactly.
Sure. I mean, I should say by way of passing, I don't define myself as an anti-Zionist. I define myself as a cultural Zionist who supports an equal binational state in the tradition of people like Martin Buber and Judah Magnus. So just so you have a little bit of better understanding where I'm coming from. I don't think that it is, I think the definition of Zionism, political Zionism, that Zionism has existed in Israel since 1948 as involving privileging Jewish rights over non-Jewish rights in Israel, I think is correct. Again, because most of the Palestinians who live under Israeli control don't even have citizenship, the most basic definition of a human right. If you live in the West Bank, you live under Israeli control, under this control of a state, and you can't become a citizen of the state. You can't vote for the government that has life and death power over you, and you live under a totally different legal system than your Jewish neighbors. So we can disagree about, I know Shai disagrees, but I don't think that the definition that Mira gave there is incorrect.
Okay, so I think
no. I want to respond because you did a bait and switch again, and
I was gonna highlight that. So I'm gonna highlight the bait and switch, and then I'm gonna. And then
we're getting the same one because he's done a lot of them here, right? You said from the existence 1948. You started talking about Israel 1948, but you talk about the West Bank 1967. So look, a small bait and switch.
I can talk about 1948 too.
No, I don't want you to talk about. I want you to just notice that you started by saying Zionism 1948, and then showed how it's wrong because of 1967. So unless we're doing this,
okay,
Okay.
So I think just
Can I
just to
respond? Can I
progress.
respond to that, please?
I want to progress. I think from moving.
I do think I should be able to respond because he accused me of a lie, right?
I
A
know, but
lie.
I have a feeling that he's going to
Two
accuse you of a
sentences.
lie
Two
in
sentences.
each portion. I
Make
and
two
then
sentences.
we're not going to progress. If it's 20 seconds,
From
and then
from
I'm gonna mute you both.
1948 until 1966, the year before Israel took control of the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, Palestinian citizens, Arab Israelis, were held under military law. Most of them needed permission from the government to even stay overnight outside of their villages. So I think that was also an example of privileging Jewish rights over non-Jewish rights.
Okay,
Done.
great. So now I'm going to create a definition so we can move forward just with a baseline agreement and carry the conversation forward. So I think perhaps the definition of Zionism that we'll use going forward is just going to be the believing in the right of Jews to exist in an ancient historical homeland. Whether or not you're going to contend that political Zionism is a different thing or it's an entity that privileges one group over another, totally fine. Just moving forward, just so we all have the same terminology here.
Sorry, can you repeat the definition?
Wait, why
Yeah.
do we have to? Why do we have to determine a definition where there is a definition? Why can't we just go with the definition of Zionism, which is the Jewish people's right to self-determination in their ancestral homeland? That is the definition. Everything else that comes later is interpretations. It
wouldn't be my definition.
Okay.
It doesn't matter.
Okay, that's fine. It's not your definition.
That is a definition.
Yeah, I think
It doesn't matter. Nobody cares about my definition of.
Okay.
Okay, I have. I'm going.
Fine. Whatever you want.
Okay, great. So I think we'll move forward with just because I think just even amongst my peers, I think that's the definition that most people will use. But then obviously in religious spheres, people view it differently. There are a lot of nuances here, but I think just for the sake of conversation, let's move on. So obviously that got a little bit heated. And the main point of this conversation is going to be to talk about anti-Semitism in the United States, but we first have to examine why there was perhaps a spike in it, which is obviously the current war in Gaza. So, Peter, this is going to be my first tougher question for you. And I honestly, Shai, I'm going to ask you the same question because I don't know your position on this. You haven't written on it that I've seen. So, Peter, you've written some columns recently in the Times about the importance of characterizing the war as a genocide. And you certainly, even on the live stream today, characterize it as such. And back your statement up with different reports who are in agreement with you. So you've also written that in terms of finding peace partners, you're looking for a democratic state wherein is your belief that the political science literature indicates that when everyone has equal voting rights, that the proclivity to violence decreases and you have a more stable state and is safer for both peoples. And you see that as the most pragmatic and most moral solution moving forward. Up until now, have I characterized your views properly?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
Fair enough.
So the tougher part of the question is as follows. If that's all true, do you think that there is perhaps a discrepancy in that political science literature and the reality on the ground as it pertains to Islam, to politicized extremist Islam in terms of the form that it is? A classic conservative political literature will view the role of politics as a political manifestation of the spirit. And if the spirit is perhaps corrupted by an extremist religious view, that supersedes, because it's more fundamental, the form of politics. So if we change the political dynamic and were to create that form of democratic state, that extremism would still exist and therefore would not lead to a safer state for both people.
That's a great question. Thank you. I appreciate it. So I think it's important to distinguish armed resistance against civilians, which I fundamentally oppose. I want to make this clear. I fundamentally oppose, no matter what your grievance, no matter what oppression you're suffering, targeting civilians is a war crime. It's a violation of international law. It's a violation of my belief that Israeli Jewish life, like all life, is infinitely precious, right? It's important to distinguish that from Islamism, because most of the Palestinian groups that have practiced armed resistance, including against civilians during Israel's history, have not been Islamist, right? If you look at the attacks of the 1970s, the Munich Olympics, the Erdligen, the Mile Law massacre, these were done by nationalist or leftist groups. One of the reasons that Israel was initially more sympathetic to Hamas as it was moving out of the Muslim Brotherhood in the late 1980s was they saw Hamas actually as more moderate, as more quiescent, because the Islamists had not been participating in this violence. If we look inside Israel proper, we look at the Ram party of Mansour Abbas, which is considered the most moderate of the Palestinian Arab Israeli parties. It's an Islamist party. It's an Islamist party. So the point I would make is, I think if you look at the history of Palestinian responses to Israel, it's worth distinguishing between Islamism and armed resistance. Armed resistance can be done by communists, it can be done by nationalists, it can be done by Islamists, and in fact, non-resistance, even collaboration like Mansour Abbas, can be done by Islamists. So I think that's the distinction I would draw.
Okay, I think that's a fair distinction, but so the distinction you're drawing is that there's a difference between armed resistance and the forms that it might take. However,
the ideology that people practice.
Right. Yeah. However, so the nature of my question drove at the fact that I agree with you. I mean, there is a difference. Anybody can commit an act of violence. The nature of the question was more so that the current parties at issue here are ones that are fundamentally religious in nature, and therefore the political solution that you're offering might not dissuade them from further acts of violence. So could you just respond to that? Because I agree with you that there is a theoretical distinction and it exists in many different areas, like you were pointing out with communists and various entities. However, that might not be the case, for example, with Hamas, or even, for example, with members of ISIS. Obviously, that was a political form of radical Islam. But that is still a violent ideology that probably would not have abated if they were existing in a democratic state.
Right. I mean, again, we have examples of Islamist parties like Mansour Abbas's Ram party that are participating politically in Israel and not turning to violence, right? In the 1980s, the Muslim Brotherhood, which was the precursor, the kind of forefather of Hamas, was actually not committing armed resistance when Fatah and the PFLP were, right? So I don't think there's anything inherent in. I'm against Islamism. I oppose the idea of any religious supremacist ideology. Period, right? But I don't think there's anything inherent about being Islamist, right, that you can't participate in a political process. And as a general proposition, I believe that violence goes down when people have a voice in government, when people have the right to vote, right? Because it means you have a way of getting the government to listen to you that doesn't require picking up a gun. That's part of the reason I think you see less violence from Palestinian citizens of Israel than you see armed resistance from Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, because those Palestinians in Israel have some mechanism of getting the Israeli state to listen to them.
Great. Okay, Shai.
So wait,
do you want to respond? Yeah. And then also, by the way, the same question to you, because from what I've seen, you're supportive of a two-state solution. So how would you respond to the nature of the same question, which is that polling data indicates that the Islamist parties are more popular amongst the Palestinian populace in the West Bank and in Gaza?
I agree.
So how do you deal with that issue?
Yeah, I will, but I want to point again two bait and switches that Peter has done again. And now you have to say, Peter, you're one of the smartest people I know. Your bait and switches are incredible. So first of all, Peter did this thing where he said, I am not an anti-Zionist, I'm a cultural Zionist, and named people that were cultural Zionists, meaning that they believed in Jewish diaspora but not Jewish statehood, before the existence of the state of Israel, Magnus, Echadam, etc. Right? Taking that position, the exact same position, but not in 1947 or 48, but in 2025, requires the destruction of a state that already exists and putting in peril the 7 or 8 million Jews who I see as part of my people. Maybe Peter sees them as somewhat lower than American Jews, but I am concerned about them. Right? That's why, for example, another bait and switch that Peter did is when he said, when Hamas targets Israeli Jews. No. Hamas targets Jews. When the terrorists on October 7 called his father and mother and say, I killed 10, he didn't say 10 Israelis, 10 Zionists. He says Yahudi, 10 Yahuds. Right? The second thing that Peter baited and switched, you asked Peter about how would this one-state nation work with the existing actors, right? Then he did this bait and switch and talk about Islamism versus non-Islamism, and you got communist and socialist terrorism, and we all agree on that. Those are facts, and Peter is a smart guy, but he never answered the question. What would you do in a state that is currently, Gaza is controlled by Hamas? The Palestinian Authority does have the pay for slave. What would you do when all that mass becomes a democracy? Now, what Peter might not tell you is, like myself, and I assume like Gidon, he is very, very Ashkenazi, meaning that he just is completely not.
Yeah, I don't know what that.
He's completely not concerned with what the history of Jews has been in all surrounding countries of Israel, where it has never worked that Jews have had equal status in the Arab states that they have lived in. Now, could they have had equal status? Maybe, but I live in the real world, not in the hypothetical world.
Okay.
Now to get on
Yes. Wait. So now to answer the question, then then Peter will do a 2-minute response. You'll have a 1-minute response to that, and then we're going to proceed to anti-Semitism because we're getting close on our time.
So for your question about a two-state, I think a one-state solution is basically a non-Jewish state solution. That means that Jews will not have a safe refuge in the world, right? And you can also see this because all of Peter's camp and his fanboys, they don't scream free Israel from the river to the sea. They scream free Palestine from the river to the sea. Well, who said that that one-state solution needs to be Palestine? Right? I don't think it should be Palestine. I don't think it should be Israel. But the fact that your movement, your people that are following you, they are not calling from the river to the sea, democracy will set you free. They are saying, min al-yam el-yam Palestine Arabia, right? Palestine is Arab. Now, of course, you can say, let's not listen to them when it's not comfortable. Two-state solution is the only thing that will, one, persevere with Jewish self-determination and also recognize the Palestinian people as a people who deserve their own self-determination. Now, it's a problem. It's complicated when you have such a radicalized population, not all Palestinians, for sure, a radicalized population, but Nazi Germany didn't become denazified overnight. There were economic plans, there were strict educational plans, just like with the Abraham Accords. We can reach that, and within 10, 15 years, half a generation or a generation, then build two separate entities that respect each side's self-determination.
Okay, great. So Peter, 2-minute response, and then Shai, you'll have like 30 seconds, and then we'll switch to anti-Semitism because that's really what I want to get to.
Sure. First of all, my maternal grandmother was born in Alexandria in Egypt. Her family comes from Izmir and the Isle of Rhodes. I guess Shai didn't do a lot of research about me before this debate. And in fact, that maternal grandmother is the person I dedicate my book to. Born in Egypt. Shai. So, Shai, no, you're not going to.
Shai, yep.
Right. So anyway, just to put that on the table. I don't support. I don't support a country called Palestine from the river to the sea. I don't know who Shai is talking about my minions. I write for myself and what I believe. I believe in the idea of an equal binational state that would reflect the collective characters of both peoples. So it would not be, and it would have a name that would reflect the characters of both peoples. Shai said he supports a two-state solution. I actually supported a two-state solution for almost all of my adult life until 2020, when I came to believe it was no longer possible. And one of the reasons that it was no longer possible was because I had spent really decades trying to convince people to do things to stop the growth of Israeli settlements in the West Bank, because you can't have a contiguous, viable Palestinian state if its heartland is going to be in the West Bank, if you're building more and more settlements and you're taking more and more land on which the Palestinians would have their state. So when I hear people say they support a two-state solution, like Shai does, I always have the same question, which I'd like to ask you, Shai. How much time have you spent over the last year and a half trying to limit settlement growth? And are you open to the U.S. trying to use its money that it gives to Israel to say no, not being willing to give money to Israel that contributes to the growth of settlements? Because if you don't, I don't quite see how actually you're supporting a two-state solution.
So I agree. First of all, I agree with you. I agree with you that unrestricted building in the West Bank is going to be a problem and is a problem. I'm not saying that it's not. And by the way, I don't know what the solution would be, right? Because just like I feel for every Palestinian person who's been displaced, I feel for the 500,000 Jewish settlers who, under many views, would be displaced as well. So I feel for people, and I do think that the only solution, right? You can have a binational state, but if you really want it to be a democracy, the first or second elections of your binational state, that state stops being a Jewish state. It has stopped being a Jewish refuge, right? Just demographically, right? Especially if you take the UNRWA definition of every person whose ancestor was ever lived in the area is considered Palestinian, right? So with your democracy, what you will have within a generation or at max 2 generations, you will have no right of return for Jews, no chok hashvut, right? no religious freedoms, and the dimitude returning just like it is in every country. And by the way, I'm glad you mentioned your grandmother, because
If we could just wrap it up so
you
we can
start your
move on.
book by saying that she would completely oppose your views, and I assume would also be ashamed of your views.
God,
So,
okay, okay.
I mean,
I don't
that's
think.
how you start your book, not me.
I think my grandmother disagreed with me. I don't think she was ashamed of me. We had different views when she
No,
was
that,
still
yeah.
alive.
Okay.
But I think that, Shai, with
So
due respect, you didn't answer my question. What have you been doing to
wait.
stop settlement growth?
No,
Okay. I'm gonna.
I think
What
he's
have you
right.
been doing?
Uh,
He's,
Yeah,
Gentlemen,
he's
20 seconds on this, then we're moving on.
No, but Gideon, he's absolutely right. He deserves
Okay.
he deserves an answer.
Yeah, that's
So
what I'm
what
saying.
I've
20
been
seconds.
doing is I've been trying to moderate people from the right who are have this messianic view of an entire Eretz Israel, and I've been trying to moderate people from the left, like you, who have this some sort of fairy tale view of this one state that works for all. I've been actually trying to get the students that are quote unquote pro-Palestine, even though they're not, to come and say, let's work together. I will be the first person to say, I believe in Palestinian right to self-determination in part of their ancestral homeland. And you will say, I believe in the Jewish right to self-determination in part of their ancestral homeland. But what happens is that the other side in this quote unquote sports game, right? The other side refuses to believe in my self-determination while I believe in their self-determination. So yeah,
Okay.
actually
So
quite a bit
yeah,
for
I think that's a good place to move on.
okay.
So we're gonna do that. We actually have a small source of agreement. Yay! So
I would have preferred. I wish I had responded to my
wait,
question. But
Peter.
go ahead,
We
Guido.
need to move on.
I
We need
wanted
to
to,
move
That's
on.
fine. Yeah,
Gentlemen.
go ahead, Guido. It's fine.
Okay. Thank you. So we're gonna move on to anti-Semitism in the United States. So Peter, I don't know if you know the Shai obviously does know this because we've been speaking for about a year now. After we were on a panel together a little over a year ago at MJE, which is a great organization. Shout out to MJE. So there has been a lot of I've met with many student leaders across the country about what they view as the drivers of anti-Semitism on their campus. And many students feel very strongly about a couple of currently contentious issues. Those being one, foreign funding. The Free Press just came out with an article today, which is I encourage everybody to read. It's a very good article about the influence of foreign money in education. So I've spent about the past year or so as the president of Jewish Students for America working with Congress to try to tackle that issue and push forward the Deterrent Act. That bill, and I'm going to ask you to both respond to that bill essentially increases transparency requirements for any foreign country that donates money to higher education in the United States, increases some of those enforcement mechanisms. President Trump actually just signed an executive order more on the enforcement side a couple of days ago. So that bill also has further heightened scrutiny requirements for certain countries. Qatar is not one of them. However, students are very concerned about the Qatari influence specifically on campuses. They poured billions and billions of dollars into universities in recent years. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask you both to respond to how you view the influence of foreign money on campuses, if you think it's a driver of anti-Semitism or not, and if you would like to see a bill like that move forward. So I'm going to start with Shai, and I'm going to ask that we keep our answers shorter because we're coming to the end of our hour, and there are other issues that I want to get to that I think you both want to as well.
I'm happy to stay for longer, by the way.
Unfortunately, I don't have more than an hour. Go ahead.
That's okay. Yeah.
I can't speak for the bill that I haven't read.
Okay.
But this has nothing to do with anti-Semitism, by the way. I think that when you have unchecked foreign influence,
nothing. It's mostly about China.
Right. So unchecked foreign influence on educational systems is a problem, especially if we take it seriously that social capital is the most important capital, especially in a post-industrial society, right? And education, higher education mainly is where you get that social capital. So if you're basically having other people invest or in your social capital with things you don't know what they're investing in, right? And there's no transparency, that becomes a problem. Yes, it becomes a problem with anti-Jewish and anti-Israel rhetoric, but it also becomes a problem with anti-Americanism. It has nothing to do with Jewishness, anti-Semitism. I find it hard to believe that someone would argue that no, we need to have billions of dollars coming from any country with no transparency, and we will trust the big corporations of Harvard Corporation and Columbia trustees to make good use of that money.
Okay, Peter.
I also haven't read the bill, so I can't comment on specifically. I mean, I think in general, as a general principle, I would say that anybody who's giving money to a university, whether it's a foreign government or for that matter, a corporation, right, there should be transparency. So if the Chinese government or, for the Japanese government is giving money for a particular program, I want to know what the rules are about who gets to decide who the professors are and that kind of thing. But if ExxonMobil or Pfizer does, I want that as well.
I agree.
Okay. Excellent. So if we could maybe, this is actually a bipartisan bill. We are all representing, I think, probably different contingents of the political populace. Although Shai, are you an American citizen? I don't know if you are.
I am not, and I also don't identify with any political leaning.
Okay, that's fine. So Peter, maybe you and I could actually work together to, if you read the bill, I know.
I don't know anything about this bill,
but maybe we could help move that forward. I think that would be really wonderful, and I think certainly a lot of students, a lot of Jewish student leaders, really are pushing for that bill. So that's the first issue. And now, obviously, the second issue, which is very current, are the deportations that we're seeing. This is actually something that I have been pushing for in a particular way for about a year. So about a year ago, the students met and we decided and we felt that there are a number of students who are non-American citizens who are in violation of their visa agreements on existing U.S. law and Immigration Nationality Act. And we felt that they posed a threat to students, specifically when they violated that visa agreement. You're not allowed to come to the United States. You're not allowed to endorse terrorism as a while on a visa. It's a violation of that agreement, and the Secretary of the State has the right to have you removed. Now, there are people who agree with that position who disagree with the way that it's been manifested in the current administration. So to both of you, how do you view these deportations fundamentally, just on the theoretical level in terms of the law, and then how do you view Trump's execution of that law? So Shai, if we could also start with you for this one.
So again, I would say, first of all, we have nuance. Right? We have to remember, while there are many ways to endorse, to break the law, endorse criminal activity or terrorist activity, there's a difference between someone signing a letter or writing an op-ed that I completely disagree with and hate, but I think they should have the right, and someone like Mahmoud Khalil and Masin Madawi, who led an organization that repeatedly excluded Jews and Israelis who refused to denounce their identity, who broke into buildings, who repeatedly expressed their open support for terrorism. So we have to make sure there's a difference between followers and leaders. Right now, with the question of the leaders, what do we do with them? Again, theoretically, we're not talking yet about the implementation. Then the question here is, at what point do we draw the line from speech to action? Right? Clear to everyone that telling someone should be killed is different than pulling the trigger, but we can't say that everything is speech, right? At some point, when you take over a university building, when you actively push Jews out, that is action. The second thing is, what is the line between terrorist activity or support for terrorist activity and not, right? I think most of us, especially living in the cushy, Upper West Side that we do, and I think 3 of us are,
I'm in Washington Heights by Yeshiva University, but
so most of us understand that some limits to terrorist activity and support for terrorist activity is important, either it's from the far right or from the far left. But again, where is that line? And the third is, what are the rights that are afforded to citizens versus non-citizens? I believe I'm the only one here who's actually on a green card who could face deportation, right? So what are the rights? And those 3 things are extremely important and nuanced. So theoretically, if you actively, take actions in support of a terrorist organization, if you actively break, in the university, repeatedly break the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which I hope Peter believes in just as strongly as I do, right? And if you're a violation of the contract of having you here, this is the green card or the visa, then yes, you should theoretically be faced with deportation. Should you be pulled out in the middle of the day by unmarked vehicles? Probably not, right? There are ways to implement it better, but yes, theoretically, I don't see any reason.
Okay. Peter, same question to you.
So, I mean, I would just notice and mention, because Shai mentioned those 2 Columbia students, that a whole number of Jewish students of Columbia have not only spoken up in defense of those students and talked about their personal relationships and how much they admired them and how well they got to know them. It's a bunch of them, actually. A number of Jewish students even chained themselves to the gates of Columbia in their support of Mahmoud Khalil. So I think it's just important to remember. I'm sure there are some Jewish students at Columbia who were very, very upset about the things that those students did, but there were other Jewish students at Columbia who were participants in those actions with them and saw them as friends. And okay, it's just Shai, just kind of, I'm sorry, but man, it makes you look like a jerk when you do that. I don't know, maybe you think it makes you look good, but it kind of makes you look like a jerk, I think.
I don't care
But
what it
anyway,
Wait, Shai, please, we're coming to the end of the hour.
It's just like anyway. It's but I think that people should not be penalized for free speech, for their speech, and they should not be penalized for protests, right? So if a group of students who are not U.S. citizens, are in green cards or their student visas, the Israeli government has said now that they support the expulsion of all Palestinians from Gaza, right, in support of the Trump plan, right? So if that seemed to me a monstrous act of ethnic cleansing, right, and which would strike tremendous amount of terror in the hearts of all of those Palestinians who are going to be forced out of their homes, right? If a group of students on student visas want to go and protest in support of the mass ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, right, I think they should have the right to do that. And I don't think they should have their student visas revoked unless they're hurting somebody. If they attack someone or physically, that's one thing. But I think people should have the right to protest, even in pursuit of things that I find abominable and even things that I think could be defined as genocide or terrorism, right? Because I think when you talk about expelling 2 million people, that seems to me likely to be pretty darn terrifying to the people you're going to be expelling, right? And I think they should have the right to do that. And I feel the same way about pro-Palestinian students who are on student visas.
I agree. I agree with Peter on a lot of things. I agree that you shouldn't be penalized for protesting or for free speech. But I also want to note again Peter's incredible bait and switches. One, pointing the very, very minuscule number of 7 Jewish students who chained themselves to the fences at Columbia out of about 1,400 undergrad Jewish students and many thousand more grad and faculty Jewish students is again why I said fringe. And that's why, but unlike Peter, I don't care what it makes me look like as an asshole or a smart person. I care about the numbers. The other thing that Peter did, a very incredible bait and switch, Mahmoud Khalil and Mohsen Madawi started organizing on October 8th, 2023. That is when they started. It's not about what the Israeli government said or did in April 2025. So what he wants you to do is judge the past based on the present, saying what they did was in opposition of something they didn't know would happen, because unless they had some sort of time machine, right? Mohsen Madawi and Mahmoud Khalil started organizing on October 8th while the October 7th massacre was still going on, and while not a single Israeli soldier has entered Gaza. Right now, Peter would want you to believe that that is some protest against genocide, although it's not a genocide, ethnic cleansing, although it's not an ethnic cleansing, or whatever it is. The facts matter, Peter. The numbers matter. October 8th, 2023. How would you respond to that?
I would say, should I respond, Guido?
Please, yeah. However much time you need.
It was pretty.
You're
unfortunately, I'm
soon.
going to have to go in 4 minutes.
Yeah, that's why. Yeah.
It was pretty clear on October 8th, 2023, which was a day in which was really one of the most horrible days of my life as we were absorbing the slaughter and kidnapping of Israeli Jews. It was very clear even on October 8th that Israel was going to launch a devastating assault on Gaza, right? It was, I think, on October 9th, right, that the Israeli defense minister said we're going to cut off food and fuel, right, food, fuel, and I think a third was water, but maybe it was electricity, to Gaza. So you didn't have to be a rocket scientist to know on October 8th that terrible things were going to be done to Gaza in the coming days.
Yes, but again, notice again the bait and switch. Right? Peter said on October 8th, it was clear because the day after, someone in the government said something. So unless these protesters have a time machine or can really read the future, it was not clear. You're judging history based on, what you know now, you're bait and switching. The fact is that the protests start the organizing for the protests start the moment that the student organizations learned of the massacre. Now,
Okay.
that is the fact. If you want to refute the fact, that's something else. But you can't bait and switch again. It's just
So
working logic.
can I just distill just for our last minute that we have you, Peter? So I have a question. Actually, I think for both of you, I perhaps noticed what might have been an inconsistency, but will have the time to correct me. So the issue with students, you're both proponents of free speech and you want them to be able to protest as such. Peter, you were highlighting only in instances of violence that it becomes an issue. So would it be the case then that you disagree with the law would have mandated that if what Shai is saying is true, that Mahmoud Khalil was demonstrating in favor of October 7th, as students at CUNY were, they were posting explicitly in favor of it on October 7th, the law would mandate that their visas would be removed. So how would you respond to that?
I don't know the. Oh, Shai, are you going to me or Shai?
To Peter, and then just because you have 1 minute left.
Okay. Yeah. And then if Shai wants the, I don't know what the law says, but I would draw a very strong distinction between committing violence and supporting acts of violence by others. If someone supports the acts of violence by the Israeli state, remember, there are more child amputees in Gaza now. Oh my gosh,
you're baiting switching.
There are more child amputees in Gaza now than any other place on earth, right? But if someone still supports Israel's attacks on Gaza, despite that, I don't think they have to have their visa revoked. Similarly, if someone supported October 7th, which I thought was a horrifying massacre and a series of war crimes, and I'm glad that for which you should be tried in international courts, if you supported those views, I don't think you should have your visa revoked. That to me is fundamentally different than if you commit violence.
Okay.
In which case, I would support you having your visa revoked.
Great. Okay.
Notice
So,
the Shai, again. So, by the way, let's be clear. According to Peter's own definition, Mahmoud Khalil and Mohsen Madawi need to be deported from the United States because they led the organizations that took hostage and hospitalized multiple janitors, the custodians. And yes, maybe they are not as erudite as the protesters that are reading Marx and Lenin, but they are actually the working class on campus, and they were the ones hospitalized and brutalized by the organization. So
they're suing the school. They just filed a lawsuit.
I'm thankful to Peter that he agrees that Mahmoud Khalil and Mohsen Madawi need to be deported. The other ones maybe not. Now, again, notice the debate and switch. You asked him about supporting the violence on October 7th, and he goes into the future saying, and I don't know if the statistic is right or wrong, about the number of amputees, to then respond to that. Peter, why can you not just respond to simple questions without bait and switch?
Can I? Maybe I'll just have the last word because I had the first one, and then we'll be done. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's totally fair. And also, Peter, I want to thank you for your time, and if you could just remember to keep the tab open while you're leaving.
I will. Yes, and thank you for giving me the opportunity. It wasn't a bait and switch. The point I was making is that lots of people support acts of violence overseas. A lot of people support acts of violence by the Ukrainians. And my point is I want a general principle which doesn't that treats all people who support acts of violence, even acts of violence against civilians, which I fundamentally oppose, the same way. I don't want Palestinians and their supporters to be treated differently. And that's why I was giving this example. That's why I don't believe that even if people did support October 7th, which I fundamentally oppose, they should not be, for an act of speech or protest, they should not be deported. And I do not, Shai is laying out a fact, but I'm just going to was clear. I believe that these Columbia students deserve due process under law. I would be very surprised if we have due process with judges under law. I would be very surprised if actually it turns out that they have done anything that deserves their deportation. I'm really grateful to both of you. I think that I was going to have the last word, Shai.
Yeah.
Thank you both very, very much.
Thank you, Peter. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I disagree again with a few things that you just said, but I agree with the due process.
Thank you.
I'll connect you guys. If you guys want to grab coffee, I'll connect you. Peter, thank you so much. Well, if you like that conversation between Peter and Shai, please make sure to check out the next video in which Shai reacts to that conversation. Please make sure to like and subscribe. I'm Gideon Askowitz, and this is 7 Minute Expert.